Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to our High Noon series. This is the second in the series. And again, this series is about MySQL, high availability, disaster recovery, and deployed at Geo-Scale. Today, we're going to be looking at Galera and how that compares with continuent tungsten clusters. My name is Matthew Lang, Director of Customer Success, and a little about me. That also is a picture of me. I'll get to that in a second. But um, I consider myself an early adopter of Linux. I even ran it on the desktop about starting 20 years ago. MySQL as well from version 3. And cloud is Amazon Web Services. When it came out, I was on board as well. Uh, I was an architect, an admin, and I worked in startups. And some of the goals I had were supporting explosive growth in company size, as well as employees, customers, sales. And this was in the automotive, steel, medical, and tech industries. So I was a MySQL DBA. I also was a DBA for another proprietary database system, Linux systems administrator, obviously, and moved toward site reliability engineering and cloud architect. Um, this really prepared me for Continuent, this last gig I did. I was also the author of a replication, again, for that proprietary database to and from MySQL. This company was using this proprietary database. They needed a website, and we really wanted to use MySQL, but we had our information in this other database. So I wrote the replication tool well over 10 years, and as far as I know, it's still in use. And again, that picture of me, weekend musician, not doing too much on the weekends due to the current events, but hopefully soon. So a little bit about Continuent before we move on. We are the MySQL availability company. And let me just talk briefly. How do we fit in? Why are we in authority to talk about this? Well, we've been around since 2004. We've seen open source uh, really take on a life of its own, and we've seen cloud computing rise. And we've really been at the forefront of the MySQL market. We've witnessed MySQL become extremely widely deployed, and in the beginning, there really was no high availability solutions for MySQL, let alone any sort of clustering solutions or Geo-Scale solutions. And that's where we come in. Uh, we do high availability, clustering, and Geo-Scale. And again, we've been doing this since 2004. So we're not a huge company. We're not the biggest, and that's really not our goal. Uh, we just want to be the best at this. And again, that's the best at clustering, highly availability, and geo deployed, highly available MySQL. So maybe you've seen the previous High Noon webinar, but if not, what we want to do is look at several solutions to deploy MySQL at the geo scale and look at highly available solutions. So what we're looking for is rapid failover in the local network so that we have high availability for our applications. We would like to have our applications geographically distributed so that we have low latency data replication with a consolidated view, a consolidated management view. Uh, Obviously, we want good performance, fast local response times for our read traffic. Um, and we want to deploy not just at a geo scale, but we want to have active MySQL primaries in multiple regions. So there would be an active database in each region that we deploy in, or each site, each cloud provider, whatever it may be. Of course, if we have an existing application, we really don't want to change the application code. We want to be able to deploy our solution without changing our applications. One other thing too is to deploy complex schema changes. without taking down our applications. This has traditionally been a challenge really with any solution. So we want to see, how can we do that? What solutions are going to allow us to do that? And then also too, let's try to avoid provider lock-in. If we're locked into one provider, obviously we don't have choice, and it could be really expensive in the long run, in the future for our application. So, and also too, when we're talking about MySQL, we really mean MySQL, MariaDB, and Percona server in any version. So let's get into the High Noon series. This is a new series where we are comparing other MySQL clustering products to Tungsten clustering. And we're going to look at a bunch of products. And what we do is we do a deep dive with each product and we rank them and we figure out what features they have, what they don't, and how well each feature works. And we're able to roll them up into kind of a scoring system, right? From 1 to 5 in each of these areas. And when you're looking at a package for an enterprise cluster, these are pretty much, the main features that you're going to be looking for. Continuous operations, right? You want your cluster to be running, your application to be online 24/7. You'll probably want to be able to scale it as well. Hopefully, you're going to have an increase in traffic, increase in business, or more drive to your website. So you want your backend cluster to be able to handle that. Um, are you going to be able to do a geographic deployment, right? Or a geo deployment? Or is it just a single region only? So we'll look at that as well. And then how is the overall performance? Are we going to take a performance hit by putting in a cluster, or are we actually going to be able to improve the performance of our application with our cluster? And then what is our application see when it connects to our cluster? Does it have to be modified? Is there some sort of change that needs to happen? Or can we just install a cluster and our applications are going to work fine? And that's what we mean by transparency. And then, of course, security is always a big issue. And so we'll definitely look at that. And that's something that's coming up more and more. So we definitely want to make sure that all of our products do support good security. And then, of course, once we get this deployed, it might be a complex system. We need a good tool to manage the entire deployment in the entire topology. And with that, too, we need to be able to monitor what's happening within our cluster so we can react if things don't look right. And then lastly, once we have our complete topology, our complete deployment all set up and running, how easy is it to replicate our data out or get our data out and load it into some analytics tool where we can have a look later and run complex analysis on our data? So one other thing too, really important, is support. Um, there are always going to be questions, always going to be issues, or maybe something that you just don't understand. And so, where will you get your support? Some options are online forums, right? Maybe not the best place or the most up-to-date information. The information in a forum isn't necessarily verified. um, Perhaps it's an email system, right? Where you email support and then the next day you'll get an answer and you'll reply to that and wait another day for an answer. Or maybe you actually get a live person, an engineer with experience. That's obviously worth a whole lot more because you can get your questions answered much more quickly and get it directly from the source. So we'll see how all these solutions compare with support. And then, of course, we talk about intangibles, right? We're clustering MySQL. So, what versions of MySQL do we support, right? Or which ones does a particular solution not support? So, that's also important if you need certain features in a certain version of MySQL. And when we say MySQL, that could be MySQL Enterprise, MariaDB, Percona, any one of those variants. Platform's important. Are you going to be deploying in the cloud, hybrid cloud, maybe on site? So whatever solution we pick has to support our target deployment. And then product maturity. I think that goes without saying. The more mature a product, the more time it has to have bugs worked out and features put in as well. And then, with all this said and done, what's the total cost of ownership, right? And how much does the physical software or all the pieces cost? But also, what about support? And what about man hours and learning the product? And really time spent on implementation, right? And that's what we call total cost of ownership. And then lastly, what we'll be looking at are the various use cases. So we see right here, we can have a quick look. We have pretty good support for HA. Each product handles it a little differently, some better than others. And we'll look at how they handle HA. DR, or disaster recovery, not everyone supports that, but it might be something that you need. You may want to avoid a catastrophic situation in a particular region, and you may need to fail over to another region or another site. Zero downtime maintenance is also important. And I think every DBA has gone through this where there has to be some major maintenance. How is that going to impact the application? Or does it even impact the application at all? And again, that flows with continuous operations, right? We need our application to be up, especially for large enterprise applications. We can't afford downtime. Um, and that includes maintenance. Okay. And then what about some other features like having multiple primaries? Is that something that we want to have? How about a geo-deployed active passive cluster so we can fail over and we can also fail back and we can leverage the DR site maybe for reads. Getting even more complex active clusters, right? Deploy a Geo-Scale topology where you have multiple active clusters and all replicating to each other and all in sync. And this goes, again, leads into Geo-Scale clusters, right? Can we deploy globally and have our applications close to our end users? So that's kind of the overview. Let's get into it now. So let's have a look at Galera Cluster. Uh, so what's interesting about Galera is it's a true multi-master cluster when you're running on a LAN. So for instance, you could have three MySQL nodes and each one of them would be a master. So that would mean they would each take read traffic and write traffic. It uses synchronous replication. Uh, Synchronous replication really guarantees that there's almost no slave lag. So whatever written on one node should be almost immediately available on any other node. And the slaves aren't going to diverge from each other. And in this sense, slave really just means the node that's receiving traffic. It's still a master in the context of Galera, but it's also receiving replication traffic from other nodes. Uh, but in any case, these nodes won't diverge from each other. They're all going to have the same data. So we can be sure of data consistency. Uh, no VIP is needed, right? So all that means is we don't have a single access point to the cluster. We can read and write to any node we want, and we just tell our application which node to read to or write to. And if we use some sort of other tool like a proxy, they can be aware of all the nodes in the cluster and that they're all readable and writable. So it is definitely a highly available MySQL solution. Uh, Failover in the traditional sense is not needed because if one node fails, there's really no failover needed because each node is readable and writable. There are various MySQL versions available that can be used for Galera. But this is a specific Galera build, so you don't just download off-the-shelf MySQL and then add Galera to it. It's really a specialized build of MySQL that you use. So you may not see every MySQL version, but there are quite a few MySQL versions available. And Uh, just released is Galera Manager, which is a GUI for managing Galera, and it also has some monitoring capabilities. Probably long overdue, and it was just released like at the end of September of this year. So that's a welcome addition to Galera. And one other thing about the replication, it's handled by a process called certification. We'll look a little bit on how this process works, but it's designed to eliminate conflicts and enforce correct ordering of transactions. So let's have a look at certification-based replication because it's really a critical part of Galera. So a transaction begins as normal, just like any other transaction. And then when a commit is issued from the application, it's not immediately committed to the database. All rows that are affected by this transaction, any changes, are collected into a set called a write set. So at this point, the transaction is not committed yet, but all the row changes affected are in this write set. And this transaction is giving a sequence number. Right? The sequence number is unique. It's like a global transaction identifier, and it's unique within the cluster. So you'll never get two nodes using the same sequence number. So there is some group communication between all the nodes to make sure that we're using unique sequence numbers. Okay. So then the node actually checks this sequence number versus the last sequence number that's been applied to that database. Now, if it sees a gap, then it knows that there are other transactions that have come before this last transaction, and it has to wait. And it collects all these sequence numbers and transactions from other nodes to fill the gap. At this point, the node determines if there are going to be any conflicts with all these outstanding transactions that need to be written. And it does this by looking at primary keys, right? If everything looks good and there are no conflicts, then all the transactions are committed. However, if it does see a conflict, then that last transaction is rolled back. And that goes back to the application, and the application either needs to retry it or take some sort of action. But this happens on each node, this certification process. And again, there's group communication. So all the nodes are in communication with each other. And this also guarantees the correct ordering of transactions when they're replayed on other nodes other than the source node. So it's a good way, again, to enforce that there are no conflicts and we get correct ordering of transactions on each node. So how about requirements for multi-site? Well, there's not a lot of multi-site support with Galera, mainly because of using synchronous replication. So again, if we think back to that certification process, um, a commit is not really committed to the database until all nodes agree that yes, this can be committed. So that takes a lot of time, round trip time from node to node to make this calculation and to return a value, yes, that we're going to commit it. So in a sense, writes are going to be slow. And this is really true within the local cluster, but over a WAN, this could be really tough. Writes could be really slow because they must travel across the WAN and an acknowledgement coming back before it's actually committed. So that could really slow down an application. And really, it slows it down to the point where it's not really feasible and it's not really widely deployed. Uh, Now, using synchronous replication, read speed is unaffected, right? We can read from any node that we'd like to. Uh, but if we want to do multi-site, we have to use asynchronous replication, which is a great replication tool, also with its own advantages. So to do that, we would enable binary logging on the cluster and then use something like MySQL native replication. Now, this becomes a little bit more complicated because now we're using two technologies for replication. So we've got our uh, replication synchronous within Galera, but then outside of that, we also have this kind of MySQL asynchronous replication hanging off the cluster. And again, so because of this complexity, multi-site topologies are not widely deployed uh, using Galera. So that really eliminates a lot of Geo-Scale deployment that we would really like to do. So some other limitations or considerations if you're using Galera, again, if we're doing write intensive workloads, we may see performance issues due to synchronous replication, right? It's going to depend on our network and the speed of all of our nodes. Uh, WAN performance, of course, is going to be poor. I mean, we've talked about that. Multi-site topologies really aren't deployed that often due to all that above. There's no proxy included. So we don't really get the features of like read-write splitting or being able to have our application fail over to another node if one goes down. Of course, if one goes down, the other nodes are still operating and we can still read and write from them. The problem is we need to tell our application uh, to use another node. So that requires another tool, a third-party tool. Um, all tables must have a primary key. And this really is good database practice anyway, so we would expect to see that. But there are quite a few databases out there uh, where tables may not have a primary key. So you would have to add a primary key. Um, And just one interesting fact, a slow node is going to slow down the entire cluster. And again, this goes back to the process of certification. Each node has to run a certification process. And if one node is slow, it's going to cause a delay in the certification process for the other nodes. Replicating out of the cluster again, that requires a different technology, something like MySQL replication, maybe ETL, whatever we need to get the data out so that we can replicate to, say, another MySQL database or maybe a data warehouse. Maybe we want to replicate to Hadoop. So that's really another technology that we have to use. Okay. And we have to use an official distribution that has all the Galera code plugged in. So we don't just download MySQL off the shelf. We use a Galera version. So how do we approach building a better MySQL Geo-Scale solution? Well, here at Continuent, we have our proven solution, Tungsten Clustering, right? This provides continuous MySQL operations, so highly available, uh, zero downtime maintenance, so we can do OS patching, MySQL patching, maybe upgrading to the latest version with no downtime. We fully support geo-distributed MySQL clusters, and really we accelerate on that, and we'll see that in a few minutes. And along those lines, we support cloud, multi-cloud, or hybrid cloud. So you can deploy in two cloud providers if you would like, or deploy in a cloud and on-prem at a geo scale. Okay. Included is the Tungsten connector, which is an intelligent proxy for MySQL. It speaks to MySQL protocol and it can handle read-write splitting automatically, so no changes to your application. Or if you have this functionality in your application, great, we can leverage it. And we support MySQL off the shelf. No changes to your application. Just use whatever MySQL version you'd like. And of course, as I mentioned, that includes MariaDB and Percona server. Let's have a look at what we call active passive clustering, right? So we can scale a cluster to multiple regions, multiple data centers, or multiple clouds, or a combination of all of that. Uh, and we really don't care if it's what cloud provider you use, if you're going to deploy it on a VM or directly on the servers. We run on really anything. Uh, and this particular topology is active passive, which means there's one site, one single site that is active and has a primary, which is a read and write database. And then all other sites are replicated from that primary cluster. And we can manage this cluster from any node within the cluster. And we can also fail over or move the primary from one site to another site. So if we have, say, in one region, maybe an outage, or we're going to be doing some maintenance on that region, we just fail over and activate the other region to become active. And then when the first region comes back online, it catches up with replication and gets added back in the cluster. And we can switch back or fail back with a single command. So just another kind of contrast. This is active clustering. And really, Continuent is the only one doing this right now. So this is where, again, multiple clouds, data centers, whatever hardware, but all clusters are active. So each active cluster has a primary that you can read and write from. And with this, you can deploy your clusters close to your users so they get the best performance. Your local users can read and write to a local database. But all these clusters are in sync with each other, and each one is active. And in a failover situation or a failure of a single site, we just redirect the traffic to another site within the cluster, and we're good to go. Again, everything is replicated between each other, and if that failed site, when it comes back online, we just add it back into the cluster and replication catches up automatically. How about we mentioned zero downtime maintenance? Uh, how would we do that? Well, let's say we wanted to upgrade MySQL. So one thing with tungsten clustering is you can mix MySQL versions, which within the cluster, and we fully support this. And this is really an avenue of when you want to upgrade MySQL. You can take a replica, remove it from the cluster. We call it shun. Go ahead and upgrade MySQL and return the cluster, return the node back to the cluster. And we're good. Replication catches back up, and if for some reason there's an error, we can just discard that node and reprovision it in a couple steps. But assuming most MySQL upgrades do go pretty smoothly, now our replica is upgraded. So we repeat that process for the other replicas and our cluster until finally our primary now is on the old version, but all the replicas are on the new version. So we do a command, we just do a switch that promotes a replica to primary and the primary to a replica. So now on the old primary, we upgrade MySQL and we're all done. No downtime and application is up. And really, this all happens in the background. And when we talk about transparency, no one notices because this is all happening in the background, leveraging tungsten clustering to allow zero downtime maintenance. So back to our scorecard. We make these scorecards to be able to see really quickly the strengths and the differences between clustering solutions. So let's have a look and start with continuous operations. Um, First is zero downtime maintenance, and we see that both products support this quite well, actually. And that's really important because you really can't afford to take your application down every time you need to make a large schema change or upgrade hardware or resize an instance. Uh, Enterprise applications need to be online 24/7. So we've got good support here. High availability also, both products do it quite well. They do it a little differently. With tungsten clustering, the primary will fail over and a replica will be promoted to primary. Galera makes use of multi-master. So that's having multiple active primaries. And if a primary fails, then you can redirect traffic to another primary. DR in an active passive cluster. With tungsten clustering, that's built into the product. So a single command will fail over to your DR site or to your passive site. Um, with Galera, now you're mixing replication technologies and there's some DIY in that. So it's not a clean solution. You can do it, but there's a lot more overhead in doing that. DR in an active cluster with tungsten clustering, it's just a matter of repointing your apps to the active site, the other active site. With Galera, there's no active cluster, so it's just simply not supported. How about DR failback? So you fail over to your DR site, how easy it is to fail back when your primary site is back up and running. Tungsten clustering, again, it's a single command, it's fast, uh, and replication catches up as soon as your other site comes online. With Galera, that's going to require a manual rebuild. So again, that's kind of the DIY part here when we're trying to link multiple clusters using Galera. Backup and recovery with tungsten clustering, it's the same tools that you're familiar with, whatever tool you want to use to back up, because you're just using regular MySQL. With Galera, you can use standard tools. However, there are additional steps to take a backup and do a recover compared to other technologies. As far as scalability, how does this work? With tungsten clustering, add read replicas. Simple. Galera handles this by using, again, all active, so you would add more active nodes. So both really are supported. Physical location, where can this be deployed? Tungsten clustering, pretty much anywhere. Hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, mix and match. Galera can be deployed anywhere, but typically it is deployed in a single site only. So there are some limitations there. And as we saw, because we really don't get the kind of geographic deployments with Galera that we can with tungsten clustering. Scalability, instance size, really the same. You choose your instance as long as it meets the minimum requirements. Same with auto scaling a database nodes. It's going to require manual steps for either one. Database cluster scaling. So really, this is great for software as a service. When we talk about tungsten clustering, it lends itself great to a pod architecture. And Galera DB also lends itself well to a pod architecture. Moving on to the geographic scaling. So how do we deploy these clusters over a large geographic region? Well, with tungsten clustering, read replicas can be deployed across availability zones, clouds, multi-cloud, what have you. With Galera, if you want to go geographic, now you're mixing replication technologies, and there's no unified management solution for that. Again, getting back to the kind of DIY. The same with active clusters. Tungsten clustering, that's part of the product. It's easy to deploy, and you manage it in the same interface that you would with any other tungsten deployment. That's not supported in Galera, so we'll just move on. And then active passive geo clusters, again, part of the tungsten product, easy to manage with the GUI tool or command line tools. With Galera, again, kind of more DIY because you have to mix replication technologies and therefore not a unified management interface as well. How about performance? And really, this comes more to the proxy read-write splitting. First is what we call smart scale. Can we do automatic read-write splitting so we can load balance across multiple database servers? And we can see with Tungsten that that we're handling this. And that, again, that's out of the box, easy to configure. With Galera, there's no included proxy. So you have to find your own proxy and add it in. So again, a little bit more of the DIY and a little less management interface as well for this because you're mixing technologies. Same thing with the load balancing. So you do have multiple primaries in Galera, but again, you need application logic or an additional proxy. Uh, Up-to-date read replicas, we use asynchronous replication for Tungsten. That's great for performance. And Galera uses synchronous replication. So you can be sure that your other nodes are pretty much in sync. And then how does this translate robust database performance? With tungsten clustering, you're using the database that you already know, whether it's MariaDB, Percona, any version of MySQL, in tune it just like you always have. With Galera, it's going to depend on your workload because it's using synchronous replication. So with that in mind, a high workload could cause some slowdown due to the nature of synchronous replication. And we talk about transparency. That's really about how does this look to our application? What changes do we have to make? With tungsten clustering, there are no application changes at all. It just works out of the box, and tungsten clustering is a bolt-on solution. With Galera, there are certain features due to the synchronous replication in use that will not work, and certain SQL constructs will not work as well. So you do have to take in consideration your application if you're going to deploy Galera cluster. Tungsten clustering supports all MySQL versions, whether it's the MySQL Community, MariaDB, Percona Server, really any version. And then you can mix versions in the cluster if you want. Galera has a wide range of MySQL support, not every single version, but they are special builds of MySQL. And then tungsten clustering is compatible with all database engines. Galera is NODB only. That is the most popular one, but there are other engines in use out there, for instance, MyISAM, and a bunch of other ones too. With tungsten clustering, you're able to leverage all those. Again, because tungsten clustering is just regular MySQL. So a topic these days that's very important is security. So how about security of your data at rest? Both products can leverage whatever technology that you would normally use to encrypt your file system. It could be an encrypted file system on the cloud, and there are other file systems, and you can mix and match, and it should work. With Galera, tungsten clustering, it works. Encryption in flight and SSL, right? So over the network, is our traffic secure? Tungsten clustering, yes. Galera, also yes. Very important. And how does this work then when we talk about compliance? So can this be used uh, in a healthcare setting or credit cards? That's called PCI. And yeah, both products can do it. And the big thing there is to be able to provide encryption. How about management and monitoring? Well, with tungsten clustering, deployment is really easy, and management functions as well as monitoring, even performance monitoring, is handled with the GUI-based cluster monitoring solution called the Tungsten Dashboard, and that's integrated as part of the product. So with that, you really have full control over your cluster, and you can get some good performance metrics from that as well. With Galera, there are some third-party tools to help with deployment or cluster management. And Galera Manager is new, so it's available and it's a good system. Again, it is new, but that is available to help with management and monitoring. One important area as well is when you have a clustering solution, and let's say you have a pod architecture and you have a bunch of clusters with all kinds of data, And you need to move that into analytics. So you can run some queries on it and do some reporting and do some really in-depth analytics. How easy is it to get your data there? Well, tungsten clustering, part of that is the tungsten replicator. And using the tungsten replicator, we can replicate real time into analytics. So, for instance, Redshift, Hadoop, Vertica, MongoDB, Elasticsearch, and a bunch of other ones. So, this really makes it easy to replicate the data from all of your clusters into a single or multiple data lakes. And again, that's using the tungsten replicator. It also supports complex filtering. So you can filter certain tables to have them replicated into your analytics server, or maybe exclude tables, exclude columns, or even do some columnar transforms along the way when you replicate it into analytics. And that's also pretty handy because if you have a lot of blob or images in your database, you probably don't want to replicate those to your analytics. That's a lot of overhead, and it's really easy to filter out that stuff with the tungsten replicator. And the tungsten replicator, of course, is cluster aware. So it follows the primary if you have a failover or you simply switch primaries in your cluster. With Galera, you have native replication. So that's pretty limited, MySQL native replication. You could use some third-party tools or DIY, but it's not really a clean solution for getting your data out. Um, it does offer filtering at really basic level. You're not really going to use that within the cluster. So those filters really aren't that useful when you have a multi-master cluster. Um, and it's cluster aware though, right? So a replication stream is not interrupted by the loss of a single cluster node. Another really important aspect is support. Tungsten clustering comes with 24 by 7 support. We have 100% customer satisfaction. With Galera, support is available, and you can get it from Codership or also Percona or MariaDB. They advertise approximately 4-hour response time. Whereas for tungsten clustering, the support is the fastest. We're pretty proud of that. We average less than 3 minutes for urgent support cases. Um, 4 hours, on the other hand, could be catastrophic for an enterprise application. How about the support team experience? At Continuent, our support team has more than 20 years per person of experience, and that ranges from DBA experience, site reliability, and admin experience. With Galera, the core developers are among the support staff, so that's good as well. How about version support? And we talked about this. Tungsten clustering supports MySQL Community, Enterprise, MariaDB, Percona Server, really any version, and you're free to mix versions if you'd like to do that. That's useful for upgrading MySQL. As far as Galera, we've got 8.021 for community and most other versions, for instance, MariaDB and Percona XtraDB. The only thing here is not MySQL Enterprise. Okay, where can we deploy this? We can deploy Tungsten clustering on-prem. Galera is on-prem as well. Both systems can be deployed in your favorite cloud environment. Tungsten clustering can be deployed on the multi-cloud. You can have a cluster in, say, Amazon, replicating to, say, a DR cluster in Google Cloud. Galera really doesn't support this unless it's more of a DIY that we talked about earlier. And that's the same with hybrid cloud, right? Deploy on-prem, but have another location in the cloud or vice versa. And again, with Galera, that's going to be a little bit more difficult because it's going to be DIY. And we talk about intangibles, product maturity. Tungsten clustering is a complete solution, right? It handles HA, DR, and Geo-Scale with active-active, active-passive clusters. It comes with everything you need. The manager piece, the proxy, and the replicator. Also comes with the dashboard for monitoring and management. And it's fully tested. It's been running for years in business critical applications. And some of our customers have been with us for 10 years. Galera does not include a proxy, so you have to find a proxy for it. And it does not include multi-site support. That's kind of a DIY part that we talked about. Um, Integrated, again, without a proxy, it makes it difficult for MySQL clustering. You have your cluster, but now it's up to your application to leverage the cluster. And fully tested, it's been in business critical customer environments for a long time. And total cost of ownership. With tungsten clustering, we don't care about the instance size, right? So you can deploy any instance size, it's not going to affect your pricing. And also, when you start adding additional instances, the pricing isn't linear. So we work with you on a subscription basis and allow you to add additional nodes, and then we true up later. 24/7 support is included. DBA resources, you can handle a large number of clusters with a small number of DBAs. And I've been in that situation before myself, actually, where I was a DBA. So support costs not really known in Galera. Uh, 24/7 support is available. It could be up to 4-hour response time. And again, most likely a small number of DBAs could handle a pretty substantial Galera deployment, just like tungsten clustering. And real quick, just the use cases that we talked about. High availability, both supported. DR, it's supported with tungsten clustering. With Galera, not out of the box, right? Zero downtime maintenance, both are supported. Continuous operations, good support on both products. Uh, Multi-primary, both supported. Active passive clusters, that's supported in tungsten clustering, but not in Galera. Again, DIY. Active cluster not supported in Galera, supported out of the box in Tungsten, and deploying at a Geo-Scale that's supported in part of the product in Tungsten clustering, it's not supported in Galera. So I've spoken about continuant solutions. Let's talk about our products just at a glance. We really have three main products: Tungsten Clustering, Replicator, and Dashboard. Uh, Tungsten clustering, this is what we've talked about, right? Continuous MySQL operations, zero downtime maintenance. We deploy Geo-Scale. We deploy using multi-cloud or hybrid cloud technologies. We include an intelligent proxy that does automatic read-write splitting. And we support any version of MySQL. And again, that's MariaDB or Percona without any changes to your applications. So I've talked about our customer service and our support. Again, we have a 1-hour SLA for urgent cases. Those cases we track very closely. We end up really less than 3 minutes for our initial response. So that's why our customers are able to measure their uptime really in years. And um, we all have experience with cloud technologies, Linux, systems administrations, and site reliability engineering. Uh, so, how does this translate into cost savings? Well, first of all, use whatever MySQL that you're used to using, right? If you want to use the free open source MySQL, that's fine. We fully support that. Um, you can choose which cloud environment you want to use um, because we run on any cloud environment. So if you get a deal with a particular cloud provider, feel free to use it. We run in any cloud provider. So that's one way as well that this optimizes your costs. And of course, downtime uh, can be looked at as a major expense. So we eliminate the risk for downtime and those costs, and that includes your maintenance operations. And DBAs can spend more time doing, what DBAs should be doing, in improving the performance, rewriting queries, um, doing architecture, instead of, really menial activities like admin and recovery. So again, continuous MySQL operations. So we do HA. We've been doing this for 15 years, and our failover is immediate. So there's not an interruption to your business. And your MySQL recovery time now, if there is, any sort of catastrophic event, could be reduced to seconds, right? And our dashboard provides a graphical view and maintenance tool for all clusters, whether they're geo-distributed or not. And we'll look at that in a second too. With zero downtime MySQL, we can do site level and cross-site failover really quickly, right? This keeps your applications online and it keeps them from being disconnected as well. And that's because of the uh, Tungsten connector. This is great also for upgrading hardware, software, doing any OS patches, again, without taking your applications offline. And we're fully MySQL compatible, well, because we're using real MySQL underneath, and it's really whatever MySQL flavor you would like to use. Of course, one of our big strengths is the Geo-Scale MySQL. We can load balance MySQL read operations across multiple replicas. We can use replicas locally. We can use replicas deployed on a global level so that applications can read from a local replica. Again, geo-distributed MySQL clusters bring your data closer to your application users for better performance and faster response times. And you can add MySQL clusters for scaling. You can add MySQL nodes too as well if you want to do scaling that way to add more replicas for better response times for your reads. Uh, because we are agnostic when it comes to cloud or whatever sort of hardware is underneath, you could deploy in the cloud, you can deploy in VMs, you can deploy on-prem. You can mix and match clusters as well. You can have a geo-deployed cluster with one site, say in Amazon, one site in Google Cloud, and another site on-prem. It really doesn't matter. But you can also fail over and fail back from these different private and public clouds or whatever platform you're using. Um, and obviously, if a node or a provider or any sort of regional failure happens, it's easy to fail over to another site or another provider. Tungsten clustering includes an intelligent MySQL proxy that we call the Tungsten connector. And it really has a lot of features, but the important feature that we want to point out, at least in this context, is that it's traffic routing. It will route to a local primary. So if we have multiple primaries deployed in different sites, it'll route to the local primary, and it can route read applications or read queries to local read replicas. And during any sort of failover event or switch event, applications are not disconnected. So your users still have a good experience even when a failover happens. And we can do kind of really cool replication with filtering, transforms in flight. Uh, if you want to use, say, replication to a non-MySQL target, we can do that. So you don't need ETL anymore. You can do real-time replication right into your analytics, and your analytics is up to date at all times. Um, and with the Tungsten Replicator, there's no charge for the amount of data or CPUs. It's just a pipeline. And we just replicate all the data from your cluster or your MySQL source to whatever target you choose. Again, this is a bolt-on application, so it's fully MySQL supported. We can use any sort of MySQL that you want, any flavor, no changes to your application. Just deploy and configure your MySQL cluster, and it's minutes. You use the same MySQL that you're familiar with. So whatever version that is that you want to use, that's what you can use. And there's no difference in your MySQL configuration. We do support SSL, which is extremely important. SSL for all in-flight traffic. So that could be your queries, replication traffic, or even the internal cluster communications, all SSL with encryption. And of course, native MySQL support. Another product too, we haven't really talked about it much, so I'll just go over it really quickly, is the Tungsten Replicator, right? And that allows us to replicate from MySQL to a bunch of targets, right? Again, we can actually replicate to Aurora or RDS, but more importantly, Redshift and analytic targets, right? Vertica, Hadoop, Kafka, there's a bunch, Cassandra, Elasticsearch, and this is really useful for multiple clusters. So for instance, if you have multiple MySQL clusters deployed and you need all the data and all these clusters to be merged into a single target, like say a Hadoop target or Vertica, the Tungsten Replicator can handle that for you. And it'll do all kinds of complex filtering. So, typically when you're running analytics, you don't really need every single piece of data, right? Especially blob data. We can filter that out for you. So just the data that you need to get into your analytics gets replicated to your analytics. It's really flexible. There's a whole lot of filters that you can do and transformations of your data as well. And if you want to give it a shot, it's available actually as an AMI in the Amazon Marketplace. You could fire it up and it'll prompt you with the sources targets and it'll happily go along. So feel free to try it. Uh, One other target, just our product, just really quickly, Tungsten Dashboard. This is our GUI management tool for tungsten clustering. So with this, you see your entire cluster, even if it's geo deployed, you see all sites on a single page. You don't have to jump around between different sites. And you can do all your maintenance here. You can see our global transaction ID, the replication progress. You can switch. So switch a primary and a replica to promote a replica to primary. You can do failovers, and it also does monitoring as well. So this is a really powerful tool. And if you're using tungsten clustering, it'll manage all of your clusters again on one single pane. And the best thing is it's included with tungsten clustering. So you don't even have to pay extra for it. All the monitoring and everything is included. So if I can just talk about Continuent as a company real quickly. Again, we've been around for a while. It's been over 15 years already. And we only have experts here. Everyone is an expert on replication, databases, site reliability. Our support team, again, same sort of experience. Everyone on the support team has at least 20 years of database and high reliability experience. And that allows us to effectively respond to our customers' needs, questions, or even just to chat about architecture or technology. And of course, we're extremely proud that an urgent case we typically respond in less than 3 minutes. That is our average response time, less than 3 minutes. So that's another reason why our customers stick with us because they know when, if they have an issue or a question, even, they can get a hold of us. So here are some of our customers. And these customers have been with us for a long time, and it spans a lot of different industries, the medical industry, uh, finance, technology, telecommunications, and gaming, as well as some other industries. So we're pretty well represented in the enterprise space and software as a service space. And why do they choose Continuent, or why did they? Well, we've on all of our surveys, we have 100% customer satisfaction rate. And that is our goal. We're constantly thinking about our customers and we want that 100% customer satisfaction. And that's what we work for. Uh, Renewal rate, again, 97.5 and multi-year renewals. And of course, companies get bought out and they may have to adopt different technologies. They may even go off of MySQL. And so that would account for like the 2.5% that don't renew, but that's a pretty small percentage, and it's usually due to a buyout. Again, average response time less than 3 minutes for an urgent case, then that helps fuel the 100% customer satisfaction rate. And our average customer has been with us for 7 years. So we do value a long-term partnership. That's another thing that we work for, is that long-term partnership. We're not looking to, for a 6-month commitment and then say our goodbyes. And just some interesting facts. So we're the MySQL availability company, established in 2004. And I've mentioned some of the industries that are represented with our software. Um, but a couple interesting things. In 2014, we were actually acquired by VMware, and we were going to build the database as a service for vCloud Air, which was VMware's cloud offering solution. Uh, Unfortunately, VMware, or maybe fortunately, but VMware abandoned their vCloud Air, and so with that, Continuent broke away and became independent again from VMware. So it was kind of interesting being selected to work with VMware. So that's a pretty big company, a pretty big player in the space, and we were quite glad to work with them. But now we're back on our own, and we decided to release some hardened security features in 2017, which is critical, especially in the cloud space. And in 2018, again, even more changes and more improvements to our multi-site clustering uh, offerings. And we saw our first 10-year anniversary this year. And now in the feature is cloud. So stay tuned for Tungsten Cloud. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. Again, my name is Matthew Lang, and there's my email address. Any questions, or you just want to chat about tech or anything else, feel free to drop me a line. Would love to talk to you. Have a great rest of your day, and make sure you see the rest of the High Noon series. Thank you.